Hello, my name is Christopher Mckay. I play the viola, and I have been a member of the Phoenix Symphony since 2008. Today I would like to take you on a musical discovery of this wonderful instrument that I play. In this short video, I will share with you some of its history and role in musical ensembles, as well as play for you some of my favorite pieces from the last 400 years that were written especially for the viola. And because our time is limited, I will focus on 7 of those pieces. So what is a viola? The viola is a part of the violin family of instruments, which includes the violin, the viola, cello, and double bass. And they were all invented sometime during the middle of the 16th century. The viola occupies the middle range of instruments, and if you picture in your mind a choir, the violins are the sopranos, the violas are the altos, the cellos are the tenors, and the double basses are the basses. There have been many words used to describe the viola's sound: warm, melancholy, dark, sonorous, and out of all the stringed instruments, it most closely relates to the range of the human voice. Composers from the 16th and 17th centuries did not use the viola as a solo instrument, and its role was maintained as purely supportive. So let us jump to the 18th century, when composers began writing solo music for the viola. In 1716, German composer Georg Philipp Telemann lifted the viola out of its accompanying role and wrote the first known viola concerto. This is from the second movement. Another piece from the 18th century is a sonata for viola and keyboard by English composer William Flackton. In 1770, Flackton composed 3 sonatas for viola and mentions in his publication that the purpose of writing these sonatas was to elevate the viola out of its usual accompanying role in order to allow the uniqueness of the instrument to shine. Here is William Flackton's Sonata No. 1 for viola and keyboard. As an instrument, the viola happens to be perfectly well suited for an accompanying role. In pieces such as string quartets and symphonies, the higher ranged instruments like the violin soar above the music with their melodies. The cello and lower sounding instruments provide the foundation for the music, and the viola fills in and completes the musical texture. Moving now into the latter part of the 18th century and into the 19th, musical styles and tastes continued to change, and during this time there were a number of composers who wrote important concertos for the viola. And there is probably no better example than a work by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart himself. Mozart was a genius in so many ways, and as he matured as a composer, he started giving the viola a more prominent role in the string quartet. The viola was now being offered opportunities to play melodies and more interesting counterpoint, thus expanding its role a bit. In 1779, Mozart composed a piece called Symphonia Concertante, which is a double concerto written for violin, viola, and orchestra. It is a true masterpiece, and Mozart gives equal billing to both instruments. Here is the opening section. Another composer from the late 18th century was Johann Hummel. Hummel was slightly younger than Mozart and was also a child prodigy. He was regarded as the best pianist of his day, as well as being a talented composer. Hummel apparently liked the viola, for there are a number of works he wrote for this instrument. In 1798, he published his Sonata for Viola and Piano, Opus 5, No. 3. Here is the opening section of that work. And this might be a good time to mention viola jokes. Where do viola jokes come from? Now, most musicians during the 17th and 18th centuries played multiple instruments, and no one was just a viola player. So, if there were too many violinists in an ensemble, they might be assigned to move over to the viola. This helped establish the reputation that the viola was an inferior instrument, and violists were just bad violinists. So here's the first joke. What's the difference between a violist and a dog? The dog knows when to stop scratching. How can you tell if a violist is playing out of tune? You can see the bow moving. What's the difference between a viola and a coffin? Coffins have dead people on the inside. How do you get two violists to play in tune with each other? Ask one to leave. And how do you keep your violin from being stolen? You put it in a viola case. I would be remiss if I didn't include Beethoven in this discussion. Though Beethoven did not write a concerto or sonata for the viola, his 16 string quartets and 9 symphonies demonstrate how the technique of the viola was beginning to expand. Beethoven's string quartets are regarded as probably the best example of this type of piece, and he expanded not only the form of the string quartet, but how each member participated. The viola still maintained its place in the middle range, but Beethoven began to explore its capabilities by writing much more technically demanding accompaniments than previous composers, as well as giving the viola more sophisticated melodies. But despite the efforts of the composers I have mentioned so far, the 19th century resulted in very few solo works for the viola. Composers such as Schubert, Mendelssohn, Schumann, and Tchaikovsky continued Beethoven's treatment of the viola in string quartets and symphonies, but there were very few works written especially for the viola. It wasn't until the end of the 19th century when Johannes Brahms wrote his pivotal two sonatas for viola and piano. These well-regarded masterpieces had originally been written for clarinet and piano, but since he loved the sound of the viola, he decided to write an alternative version. These were simultaneously published in 1895. Here is the opening of Brahms' first viola sonata in F minor. So up until this period, the viola still hadn't achieved much solo recognition, and in the 19th century, the violin reigned supreme with concertos composed by Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Tchaikovsky, and Brahms, not to mention countless others. This brings us to the 20th century, which I would like to unofficially call the century of the viola. In this century, composers began recognizing the tonal and emotional capabilities of the viola, and such composers as William Walton, Paul Hindemith, and Bela Bartok wrote masterful viola concertos. In 1915, German composer Max Reger wrote his 3 suites for solo viola. Reger was highly influenced by J.S. Bach's 6 cello suites from the 18th century and wanted to give the viola an opportunity to shine. Here's the opening of the first suite by Max Reger. The last piece I would like to play for you was written in 1922 and is a sonata for unaccompanied viola, opus 25 number 1 by Paul Hindemith. Not only was Hindemith a great composer, but he was a violist as well and contributed greatly to the viola repertoire. In the 20th century, composers really began to think outside the box as far as what music can express, and in the fourth movement of this sonata, Hindemith's instructions to the performer translate roughly as frantic pace, wild, beauty of sound is a minor matter. Thank you so much for watching. I wish we had much more time to discuss all of the composers and violists who have championed this beautiful instrument over the last 400 years. But nevertheless, I hope this gives you at least a glimpse of the viola's sound, its history, and how it fits into musical ensembles. Goodbye for now.